Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for inviting me and getting me out of the insanity that comes with moving and being surrounded by boxes in just about every single room. It's been a delightful journey. My name is Lisa J. I am a recovering codependent coming to you live from the Chicago area in Illinois. Yeah, so I'd like to offer up the title of my workshop for today, because it really isn't perfectionism. Because I don't know about you, but I got years of perfectionism behind me. It's not pretty. So the title for the workshop today was Making Friends with My Mistakes and Failures. Yeah, and I want to give the description because I think this was an important motivator for me being here today. As a perfectionist, mistakes and failures destroyed my self-worth, self-esteem, and any hope of success. Recovery changed my relationship with mistakes and failures forever. Let's come together and share our collective wisdom about these invaluable and not to be missed experiences. We'll write a little, share experience, strength, and hope, and support each other on this journey of self-discovery, learning to love ourselves, not in spite of our mistakes and failures, but because of them. So I always like to give just the quick 5-minute or less version of my qualifications for being in Coda. I joined Coda March 16th, 1989, when I was 26 years old and ready to drive my car off a cliff over a guy that I can't even remember his name. Yeah, it's like that. And, I came in very broken. I came in having been groomed and programmed to be codependent. I was taught that what other people thought and felt was more important than myself. I was overtly told that it was my job to anticipate and figure out what other people wanted and needed. And if I didn't, then I was, treated pretty harshly, and there was a lot of shame and that put upon me for those things. When I came into Coda, my first meeting, I was in Santa Cruz, California. For those of you that know Santa Cruz, California, it's an absolutely beautiful spiritual place where old hippies go to die, is how I call it, because tie-dye is still in fashion, and you get to meet people named Star and Rainbow and Eagle. And I poke a little fun, but it's actually a beautiful place. And it's where I started my recovery. And I remember walking into my first meeting and knowing that I was with my people and knowing that I was at home. And I've stuck with it ever since. I'm very grateful to be a identified member of Coda. I've been through a lot of things over the years since I started. I've been married and divorced a couple times. Again, not proud of it, but that's part of my story. I would chalk those into the category of mistakes and failures in some ways. I've had children, raised children. I'm now a grandmother. I have 4 grandchildren, and I absolutely love life. And I love what life has brought me, and I love where life has brought me. I have a sponsor. I have worked the steps multiple times. I have been in service at multiple levels, from the local group all the way to world service. Highly recommend service, whatever, wherever, be of service, because you know what? Without service, there's no Coda. And I always put in my little teeny plug for service. That's my thing. So I hope that gave you kind of an idea of how I qualify. I'm also in other 12-step programs. I identify as a recovering alcoholic, compulsive debtor spender, compulsive eater, and co-sex addict. I also tell people that I can use anything to take the place of God in my life. And today, just in this moment, I choose to have God be in charge instead of turning to other things to be my God and my higher power. A couple things that I like to do before we get started. First off, self-care. I am 100% believer in self-care. If anything gets said here where you get triggered or you feel like you need a little break, need to shut the video off, I am 100% for that. We will have a break. If someone on the committee could let me know when we get to about halftime, I don't care where I'm at in the workshop, just say, hey, Lisa, halftime, 5 minutes. I need that right now because I've been through a lot. So please let me know. I believe in breaks. We need breaks. So if you need to take care of yourself, please do. I won't be offended. And if I am, I'll go call my sponsor and work a step and it'll all be okay. The other thing I would like to encourage all of you to have some sort of writing material. And what I mean by that, pen, paper, if you're the person who puts the notes in your phone, use your phone. I used to sponsor somebody who only had one hand and she broke that hand. So if you need to record or do some other thing, I'm just asking that you have something, because what we're going to be talking about, I'd like you to have something specific in mind, and we'll get to what that is. But if you could be prepared with that, I would appreciate it. I am going to start off with a story. I'm only going to tell you part of the story, and then I'll finish up near the end with the whole rest of the story. But I wanted to tell you a story about a mistake that was a defining moment in my recovery and life-changing. And typically I do not talk about my work or what I do, but in this case I need to a little bit. So please know that it's not meant to be this is what I do. It's more about, this is to fill out the story and to help you understand what I do and why it was so significant. So after being on disability for 6 years and being unable to do the work I used to do, which was to work with children, I had worked with children for about 20 years. I went into, I'll call it corporate business type office setting. And at this time, I was the payroll person. I make sure everybody gets paid. Well, as I was reviewing the recent payroll that I had submitted, I came to realize that I had paid a couple of our construction guys too much money. In fact, I paid them for hours that they didn't work. And I was absolutely mortified. It was several $100s. It was probably over $500 US. And I was scared to death. I was absolutely scared to death. I was absolutely convinced I was going to lose my job. And so as a recovering person, I had this battle going on inside, because on the recovery side, it's like, I know what I need to do. I need to go to my boss. I need to tell him what happened and suck it up, buttercup. And then there's the other side going, oh shit, I'm not losing this job. How can I hide this? How can I bury it? How can I make it so that they don't know, he doesn't know what I did? And I'm going to be honest, this little battle went on for about 20 minutes in my office, back and forth, back and forth. And because of my recovery, because of what I learned in program, I paused, I prayed, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. So I'm pretty sure my boss saw my hands shaking and my voice a little quivery, but I went in and I told him what happened. And he said, okay, I'm going to talk to the owner. I'll get back to you when I've had that conversation. And I went back to my office and I remember thinking, okay, that's it. I'm done. I no longer have this job. It's over. I felt afraid. I felt ashamed. I felt guilt, which I think was appropriate. The shame kind of went along with those shame messages that many of us in recovery often deal with. And I'll tell you about some of mine. I'm a piece of crap. I'm stupid. I'm always going to screw up. I'm never going to get this right. What is wrong with me? Who do I think I am that I can come into this kind of job and do this with, minimal, I'll say minimal life experience. I mean, it was just relentless. And I remember going home that night. I don't remember if I told my spouse at that time what happened, but I remember posting on social media, please pray for me. I'm scared that I'm going to lose my job. And so I'm going to pause there because I am of a belief that I am not the only one in this virtual room that has ever made a mistake and maybe had to deal with some of those sorts of things. So this is where your writing material or whatever material you use to make notes on, what I would like to ask of you in this moment is to remember a mistake, an error, or a failure you experienced. It could be current, because sometimes we're in it in the moment, right? and or it could be in the past. So if we could take a couple moments and just have y'all kind of get a sense of that. And the reason I'm asking you to write it down or get it in some kind of print format is I want it out of here and onto something that you can like hold up and look at. Okay, so if we could just take a couple moments to do that. I'm gonna put myself on mute and take a sip of water. And I'll give you probably about 2 to 3 minutes if you guys are good with that. Thank you. So as you are writing that down, please also consider writing down how you felt in that moment. And so for those just joining, we're talking about mistakes and failures and how to make friends with them. And what we're doing right now is we are writing down a mistake, error, or failure that we may have experienced, either current or past, and also writing down some feelings that may have come up around that, or maybe even some thoughts that came with that, as I described some of the shame thoughts that I experienced. Also going to ask you to consider writing down what action or reaction did you take regarding that. We'll take maybe 1 more minute. Okay, if you're still writing, that's okay. Consider moving towards wrapping it up. So one of the patterns and characteristics that we have under the low self-esteem patterns is have difficulty admitting a mistake. Are any of you in that category? If you can show a hand or do one of the reactions and raise a hand. Yeah, that was me. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I see a few of us. Yeah. Thank you. And I recognize that, I know not everybody has that issue, but I know for me, I did. And so one of the things that I'd like to do, and Christina, this is where I'd like to do some of the popcorn answers where people can just pop in. If you can give me a brief response to the question, why? Why is it difficult to admit mistakes? And I believe you'll have the ability to unmute yourself and just pop out some answers. Agreed. Thank you so much for sharing. And everybody, thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to share, because I have to admit, I could identify with just about every single one that went on there. These are driving forces, and they have been a part of my history and my experience as well. And so the result in my experience of being around the rooms for a while, the two extremes that I have experienced as far as results, and please understand, I realize it's a continuum. It can be a variety of things that can result. But what I've learned is that it can either be apathy, why bother? Why bother trying? Why bother doing anything? Because I'm just going to screw it up anyway. Or the flip side, perfectionism. I will never make a mistake again. And for me, these were the extremes. Again, I realize that there can be a variety of things. I've also learned that codependency is a disease of extremes. And hence, here we are. So with that, I'd like to do that show of hands thing again. If you guys could kind of be with me for a minute. How many of you have issues with perfectionism? Throw a hand up. Yeah, me too. Here, I'll put 2 up because it's that bad some days. Thank you. And what I find gratifying and validating for me is that I'm not alone, because I used to think I was alone in this. I used to think I was the only one that struggled with this. I was the only one. I was so special, unique, and different. And that's the isolation that I think that comes with our disease. And so seeing all those hands, seeing the nodding, seeing even the smiles, because for me, even that is a validation as well, lets me know that I'm not alone, and lets me know that there are other people who are in the same camp as me. Now, I also want to acknowledge that I have vacillated between the two. There have been times when I haven't wanted to take a risk, where I've had that apathy that said, why bother? We have any of you here today? Any apathy people that just said, nope, I'm not doing it. I'm not even going to try. Thank you for your transparency and your honesty. And I've been there as well. I think it's important for us to be able to acknowledge that we can have little bits of both, depending on what it is and where I'm at and what's at stake, right? Because with my job, for example, that was a big deal. And it would have been an easy way to go down that path. And so another pattern and characteristic that I noticed that may fit in with this that's going on, need to appear to be right in the eyes of others and may even lie to look good. Now, I want to tell you, when I first came to Coda and I got a sponsor right away, and we sat down to meet one time, and she said the only way that I could lose her was if I lied to her. Now, what I want you to know is that I had been a liar almost my entire life. I would lie to get out of anything. I would lie to look good. I would lie. And I remember calling her after we met, and I told her all this. And I just blurted it all out. And she said the most beautiful thing to me. She said, "But you're not going to do that with me." And I went, "Oh, well, okay." And guess what? I didn't, because I didn't need to, because it's really hard to lie. At least in my experience, it was really hard to lie with somebody who just unconditionally loved me. You know, there wasn't somebody trying to put conditions or, you know, you got to hit this mark. And if you hit this mark, then I didn't have any of that with her. And so she was right. I never lied to her. And it was the beginning of learning about what that was about for me. And so one of my questions to all of you right now, and this will be an opportunity for you to look at those patterns and characteristics and to consider them. And I'm sorry I don't have them to put on screen. They're too big to actually put on the screen anyway. But if something comes to mind, what I'm wondering is, are there any other patterns and characteristics that may contribute to this reluctance to admit mistakes? And it's okay if you guys take a moment. We have plenty of time. We can take a moment to consider that. And it's okay if we don't come up with any.
So my internet went out, so I'm using my cellular phone right now. So here we are. And I did ask the question. I'm sure you guys were answering and I was not here. So if we could kind of just scroll back just a little bit. We were talking about patterns and characteristics that might contribute to the reluctance to admit mistakes. And I will need assistance in calling on people because I can't see anyone. So if I could get assistance, I would humbly appreciate it. Okay, so in moving forward from there, there are a lot of feelings that can come with mistakes, errors, and failures. I'm just going to hit on a couple of them. I know many of you have mentioned some. Fear, shame, anger, and guilt are some of the ones that really came up for me. And I find, as I've been sponsoring people, that they come up quite often. So I found that in our Coda Blue Book, there is a lot of information in there about being a recovering codependent or identifying as a codependent and dealing with mistakes. And so I wanted to reference a couple of those during today's workshop. Let me see, where am I at? Time check. Okay. From chapter 2 on page 22 and 23, we begin to realize that perfectionism is merely an illusion. Over the long haul, we make many mistakes and at times slip into our former codependent behaviors. And then on page 83, in chapter 3, goes on to talk about, sorry, I'm just scrolling through my notes here. Being human, we make mistakes. We may have codependent slips from time to time. Remembering this, we approach recovery with love, acceptance, and compassion and care for ourselves and others. We remember that love and codependence cannot coexist. Progress is our goal. We give ourselves to God and ask to be guided throughout every moment of our day. We work our program to the best of our ability and help others to recover. In this way, We are the experience, strength, and hope of recovery in Codependence Anonymous. And so as I considered this, I was also reminded of something that happened with me in that same job before I got the new boss. When the new boss came in, I was informed by him that my previous boss never told me about my mistakes in the job. She just corrected them. And I'm not sure how that would impact all of you, but I know for me, I was immediately triggered. It sent me immediately into shame, like the shame spiral was immediate. I actually got up and left the room because I was going to cry, and I didn't want to cry in front of the new boss. And so I remember just going through this deep shame and this deep sense of incompetence, and again, all those shame messages that I mentioned before. And so I share that with you because I have these extremes within me. If you don't tell me about my mistakes, I feel like an idiot. But if I find out about my mistakes, I go through the same exact feelings. It was really shocking to see it happen. And so I recognize that what had started to happen for me in my recovery is I started to realize that avoiding my mistakes was not going to help me. So trying to lie, cheat, or get out of them was not going to work. But the flip side of having somebody, just rub me and tell me I'm going to be okay and not tell me wasn't going to work either, because then that puts me in the one down, and it actually it kind of crosses over into being like a parent-child kind of thing. And that wasn't going to work for me either. So I hope I have painted the picture of the double bind that can happen around this, that ultimately to be a loving and mature adult person, I really needed to learn how to deal with my mistakes. And so with that comes the question, how do I make friends with my mistakes, errors, and failures? Let me see where I'm at here. Okay, I don't want to go too far. Let's just touch on this one piece, and then we're gonna pause. I think it'll be a good time for a break, and then we can finish up. So one of the things that I've learned in my recovery is to reframe things. And so when I made mistakes in the past, I shared with you what the shame messages were that went off. I shared with you how the feelings that would take over. I could lose sleep over this. In my history before recovery, I would lie, cheat, do whatever I had to do to not get caught. Okay. And so to reframe, one of the things I learned was that errors, mistakes, and failures teach me about myself. And one might ask, Lisa, how does it teach me about myself? When I got into recovery, I used to react, and I used to just go with whatever came up. If it was a feeling, I went with it. If it was a thought, I went with it. When I got into recovery, one of the things that I learned how to do was to pause and to consider, okay, what's going on here? And I learned to observe what was happening. And so I would observe my thoughts. I would observe my feelings. And I would also observe my reactions, because sometimes early in recovery, I didn't have a lot of that C word control over my reactions. I would still kind of leap, if you will. But it taught me about myself, taught me about some of those thoughts that I mentioned. They used to just run rampant, but I started to pause and look at them instead of run from them. And I started to analyze, okay, where did this come from? Who used to say this kind of stuff to me? Do I need to do this anymore? And in fact, is this even a good thing for me to do? I would have feelings, as I mentioned, usually fear, shame, anger, or guilt, some, sprinkling of all of those. And I also learned early in my recovery that I'm powerless over my thoughts and feelings. I can't make them not happen. I used to try. And in fact, I thought I was a failure because I couldn't control them. I couldn't make them not happen. Somewhere along the way, I got the message that I should be able to control them, and I couldn't. And so learning that I was powerless over my thoughts and feelings really helped me to become more of an observer of them, rather than, I don't want to say owner, but that I could control them. And so I started to recognize feelings that would come up. Okay, where are those feelings come from? What's driving those feelings? Do I really need to go down that path? And then the reactions. The reactions could be pretty volatile, outward, usually not outward. They were usually inward. I would usually beat myself up, or I would withdraw from people, or I would just withdraw and I would check out. And before recovery, many of the things that I told you about, alcohol, spending money, eating food, the co-sex addict thing was something a little different along the lines of being married to a sex addict. But I could reach for anything and do anything to take the place of God in those moments and to take away the feelings so that I wouldn't have to feel them. And so, where are we at time-wise? Could we take a break right now? Because I'd like to come back. I'm going to try to come back because my internet is back up. And then I'd like to join the group again and maybe have some sharing. This may give people time to think about how mistakes, errors, etc., have taught you about yourself. I'd like to have you guys think about that. And then when we come back, we can pick up from there. Would that be okay with you guys? Thank you. I love you guys, and I will be back. I'm excited to hear from the rest of us about this, okay?
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to go ahead and resume. So where we left off was, how do I make friends with my mistakes? And we were talking about reframing. And one of those reframing concepts around making friends with my mistakes is that mistakes, errors, failures, whatever word we want to use, they teach me about myself. And some of the ways that, just to recap, was I get an opportunity to look at my thoughts, my feelings, and my reactions. And so when you think about maybe that mistake that you're looking at right now on the paper or screen or however you recorded it, and if you were to take that and reframe it into something on the flip side, which would be positive, something that teaches you about yourself, I'm wondering if anybody's willing to share something that they learned about themselves, or somehow that it turned into something that's not so awful and bad as a result of going through that error, mistake, or failure. Is there anybody who would like to share about that, your experience? So we talked about reframing. And one of the things to do to reframe is to teach me about myself. Another one is about the self-talk. And I wanted to read an excerpt from our book. It's on page 109. And this falls into the self-talk / self-parenting category. If we make a mistake, our parent self or inner parent refrains from making self-shaming statements. Instead, we address the mistake with a compassionate inner dialogue, such as, I know I made a mistake. I feel sad and guilty about it, but I'm human. Sometimes I make mistakes. We nurture ourselves with loving behaviors and thoughts. For me, of course, I shared with you about my original story, and the story that I started with at the beginning happened about 7 years ago. I was living in Las Vegas, Nevada at the time. And something that I learned in general through my recovery is it's not if I'm going to make a mistake, but when I'm going to make one. I am going to make mistakes, period, dot, end of discussion. It is going to happen. Now, I struggled with this for a little bit because I started thinking, am I being really negative? Am I not, having a positive attitude, and all those things that get thrown about to make me a better person? And I thought, you know what? I really gave it some thought, and I kind of vacillated back and forth. And I finally got to the place where it was like, you know what? I'm human. I am going to make mistakes, period. And it was important for me to have that level of reality, because I can either get really high or really low. Remember I said codependency is extremes? I'm either always making mistakes or I'm never going to make one again. Well, the truth is it's just going to happen. And how am I going to respond to it? And I'm going to share a life lesson near the end around that. So with that comes one more reading, and then I want to talk about the self-talk a little bit. because I found some great stuff in our book. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I read the book and I set it down and then I go to read it again. I'm like, when did they put that in there? Because I don't remember seeing that in there. But I see the highlights from a previous reading and I go, damn it, I did know it was there. But for some reason, some different things stuck out this time. And I have one that's really profound that I want to share with y'all. So on page 116 in our book, there's a question that says, what is a codependent slip? Any of you ever had a codependent slip? Yeah, yep. Slip means, dictionary definition, to stumble, fall, or make an error or mistake. And in our case, as a recovering codependent, it means I momentarily return to using codependent behaviors. Now, here's a really big thing that I know they put in there when I wasn't looking last time, but it's there. And it says, there's not complete abstinence in our recovery. We're human and make mistakes. How we deal with those mistakes is what's important. And as was referenced earlier, we can use a 10th step. We can use a 10th step to address it. But the part that really stuck out for me was there's not complete abstinence in our recovery. Now, I'm a recovering alcoholic. You put the plug in the jug, I'm sober, boom. But I don't have a jug to put a plug in when it comes to codependency. And I realize I'm talking from an alcohol perspective. It can be drugs, it can be sex, it can be money, food, whatever it is. There is no abstinence when it comes to codependency. It really is about progress. Another thing, we also try to remember that our mistakes help us to determine what aspects of our recovery we should work on, and we ask our higher power for help, which was my next point, that facing my mistakes and looking at them shows me where I need to focus my recovery work. And so I'd like to open up for a little bit of discussion here. We talked about two different things. We talked about the self-talk, which can be revealed to me where I might need to focus on my recovery. I see some notes popping up and I'll try to get to those, or somebody can try to get to those in a minute. It shows me where I need to focus on my recovery. And so where I may need to focus on my recovery, maybe I am making a repeated mistake. And I keep doing it over and over. And that may be an indication that I need to go and look at the steps and start applying the steps to whatever that thing is. It may be a shortcoming. It may be a trigger. It could be a lot of different things. I may need to take a look at how I'm speaking to myself. I can be just brutal to myself. And I know where it came from. I can identify each voice as it comes. That could be my mom, my dad, my grandma, my sister, a teacher from my history, a previous partner or spouse. I've got a whole committee of them in there. It may be an idea that I need to start looking at how I talk to myself. And I found this funny proverb here because I did a Google search for some. I'm going to try to insert some of them. And these are proverbs that don't have a person's name attached. It could be cultural, or they could just be out there anonymous. One of them, I never make the same mistake twice. I make it 5 or 6 times just to be sure. I kind of like that because I thought, yeah, that's me. I've been there. So I'd like to open up to all of you to talk about that mistake that you're looking at, that I asked you to consider: mistake, failure, error. We're turning it into a teaching opportunity. We're reframing it into making friends with it and looking at how it has helped us, supported us, or shown us something about ourselves. Can you identify if it showed you a place where you needed to work on your recovery? And if so, how? I'm not asking you to reveal your mistakes or anything like that. This isn't a public 4th and 5th step. This is really more about, what did you learn? Let's talk about how it supported us in our recovery or changed us. So if it was about the self-talk, talk about that. If it revealed somewhere that you needed to focus on your recovery, if you're willing to, tell us a little bit about that. Is there anybody who would like to share about that? I can't tell you how appreciative I am to hear your experiences, and it's affirming and validating that this process really works, and recovery really does change lives. And it gave me, I'll speak for myself, it gave me the tools to actually mature and grow up. I literally grew up in Coda. Like when I first came here, I had a very teenager kind of mentality at 26 years old. And it's not like that. I really feel like I grew up, and I really feel like all those things that I needed around parenting and role models and guides, Coda and 12-step recovery in general provided those for me. You know, when I needed a mom, there were women there that could fill that type of role. When I needed a father type figure that wasn't going to harm me on all the levels, there were men there that could do that. If I needed a brother or a sister or just, you know, a good friend, I believe higher power provided through program. It's just been amazing. So I'd like to go back to our text again, because the final thing that I want to talk about is sharing about the mistake or whatever, the mistake, failure, or error. And in our Coda book on page 117, it says, if we continue to slip, we may consider reworking the steps on that issue. Fast forward to page 119. We may be afraid to hear about our mistakes or shortcomings, and in turn become defensive or critical, possibly avoiding or lying about a situation. We become terrified of being discounted or abandoned. We control others out of fear of their disappointment or anger with us. Oops, sorry. The shame we fear most is the same type of shame we experienced in our childhood. Many of us find it helpful to share these fears with our sponsor or friends. When we confront these feelings and the resulting progressive fears, we're able to soothe and possibly eliminate their intensity. So this is a great place to, I'd like to hear from you all again about your experience. Think of the situation or you know, fear, failure, mistake that you listed. Fear, error. I just made an error about errors. That was brilliant. I'd like you to think about that situation that you wrote down or noted, and were you able to share with someone about it, whether it was a sponsor, a friend, maybe a family member? And was there an outcome to that? It could be positive or negative, so I'm open to hearing if it didn't go well. But I'd like to hear your experience of sharing about the mistake, error, or failure, and what that was like for you from a recovery standpoint. I appreciate you sharing. So I'd like to take this opportunity to finish up my story from the beginning, when I told you about the mistake I made as a payroll person, and I paid people. It turned out to be, in my mind, a lot of money. And I had a boss who said, okay, I'm going to go and talk to the owner and see what we're going to do about this. So I had to wait 24 hours for a response. And the next day I went to work pretty jittery, but I thought, okay, you know, I'm willing to accept whatever comes my way. I know I did the right thing. I did what my God would have me do, and I was honest. And I went into his office and I sat down, and he said that he had talked with the owner, and what he pitched to the owner was that it's the cost of doing business. People make mistakes. Now, what I want you to know is that this was a multi-million-dollar company, and my mistake was about probably $700. And so to them, it was nothing. But to me, as somebody mentioned earlier, yeah, I made it huge, because, you know, if I made a $700 mistake at home, I'd feel that, you know. And so that was the first thing, was that he was able to put it into the framework of business and say, this is the cost of doing business. Mistakes happen. But here's the gem that came out of this. He said, he looked at me and he said, I can trust you. I can trust that you're going to be honest with me. And that is invaluable to a person in his position. His position was called controller, which is an amazing position to have as a codependent, just saying. But for him, you know, that meant he was the accountant, basically. He took care of all the money, so that if he had an assistant that he could trust, that's invaluable. It never occurred to me that my being honest would communicate something to him and represent trust. And so from that moment on, that person knew that he could trust me. He knew that if a mistake was found or if I made a mistake, I was going to go to him. And when I think of this whole picture that we've been talking about reframing and looking at things as teachers and opportunities to learn and grow and to learn about myself, you know, that promise that talks about being trustworthy. I found out I was trustworthy. Told you I was a liar. I told you I had a history of all these other things. And suddenly I'm trustworthy? Phenomenal. Blew my mind. And the defining moment that came out of that for me was that I did not need to be afraid of my mistakes anymore. Even if somebody blew up and got stupid and said horrible things, all that stuff, I had the confidence within myself to know I'm doing the right thing by revealing that I've made a mistake or admitting a mistake. I'm mature enough to handle the consequences. I have a program of recovery. I have a sponsor. I have these tools that were given in this program. I can get through it. And I have to tell you that over the years, there have been a lot of mistakes. There have been a lot of errors. There have been a lot of failures, or what I categorized as failures. But the truth of it is that none of these things are bad or horrible. They're actually, in the end, gifts. And the most valuable gift of all, when I think about 12-step recovery, is that I've been through these things, right? Like I'll tell you right now, I lost a 20-year marriage. And I thought I was a failure. I thought I was this horrible person because I couldn't make that 20-year marriage last longer. And what I have found since that time is that there are other men and women who have come along who have lost long-term relationships. And my higher power has used my experience to help others. That's the silver lining. So it never goes to waste. Nothing goes to waste in my 12-step recovery world strategy life. And recently, I wanted to just touch on how I respond to others because of what I've learned in program, because of the things that I've shared with you. When I encounter mistakes at work, other people's mistakes, and these people are not in recovery, so let me just throw that out there. I've got one who avoids and says, you know, wants to push it off and do all those other things. And I remember having to pull her aside and say, look, I'm not writing you up. You're not going to lose your job. I'm just letting you know what happened. And she went, oh, like literally her whole body just like, and from that moment on, she's gotten better, not perfect, but better. I have another person who was making mistakes and she kept thinking she was going to lose her job. And I kept sitting down with her and say, this is not punitive. I'm not punishing you. You're not getting written up. We're looking at ways to correct the mistakes and solve the problem, not to berate you and belittle you. She couldn't handle it. She quit on me yesterday. She quit. She just quit. She'd never been written up. She'd never been, you know, suspended or anything. She made some big mistakes. I was going to sit down and talk with her, but she quit. And I thought, that would have been me. That used to be me. That's the cut and run. And so program and people like you have taught me that when I can face my own mistakes and accept and love myself and process through them, etc., I in turn have the ability to do the same for others. That doesn't mean that I don't hold people accountable. People are accountable. I have had to write people up. I've had the unfortunate experience of having to let people go. But I didn't do it at the beginning. You know, when the first time, it wasn't one and done. It was, there's this process, there's this idea of helping people and supporting people to grow and learn and do better, be better. People like you in this program taught me that. You taught me that by example. You taught me that by doing it with me and showing me a different way. I absolutely love Codependence Anonymous and what it's brought to me. And out of that is why I come and be of service in whatever way that I can. And this workshop has been very personal for me. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to share with all of you, not only that, but to listen to your experiences. I want to say thank you to the committee for asking me to come It's a privilege and an honor. With that, I am complete, and I want to say thank you to all of you. Mwah. I love you.